Welcome to another episode of the Construction Leading Edge podcast, the podcast for construction leaders. My name is Todd Dawalt, and my goal is to provide the tools and resources to grow your leadership skills, grow your business, and grow your income. Today's episode is an interview with a good friend of mine. His name is Greg Laszczynski. Greg has worked his way up through the ranks in engineering and construction companies up to the level of vice president and president. He currently runs a district for Layne Inliner that does about $60 million in revenue in the Northeast. I had the opportunity to work with Greg a few years ago for a brief time, and during that time I learned some valuable lessons on building relationships, leadership, and dealing with customers. He also has some great advice for us for small business owners in the construction industry, as well as young leaders and everyone else in between. So let's get started and hear from Greg Laszczynski. All right, well, Greg, thanks so much for agreeing to be on the Construction Leading Edge podcast today. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine, Todd. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, I had the privilege and the pleasure of working with Greg for a few months back in 2010. And so I wanted to bring Greg on the podcast because I certainly learned a lot from Greg, and I'm confident that everybody that listens to the podcast will as well. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. So to start with, Greg, if you would, give us a brief overview of your background, your career, and what you're up to now.
Well, I was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and I attended a technical pre-engineering high school here in Baltimore. Shortly after graduating in 1972, I obtained a job as a draftsman at a local chemical plant, FMC Corporation, working in their engineering department. The engineers I worked with encouraged me to pursue an engineering degree, so I enrolled in the evening college at Johns Hopkins University in their civil engineering program about 3 months after I joined that firm. I left the chemical industry and went to work as a design engineer for a Danish company in the late 70s. This company produced process equipment for various industries to include the chemical, pharmaceutical, and power generating industry. There I was promoted into research and development and transferred to Denmark for 1.5 years. After returning to the U.S. in the early 80s, I was offered an opportunity to return to the chemical industry back with FMC Corporation. Now, being the only civil engineer at the facility, I was assigned to all of their capital and maintenance civil engineering projects, where I started working with trenchless technologies to solve multiple issues with their underground infrastructure, namely process sewers. In 1987, the trenchless technology company I had been utilizing for the past 4 years at that plant offered me a job as their director of operations, which is when I transferred from project management in the chemical industry into operations management for a publicly held specialty construction company, performing trenchless technologies on underground pipes, namely in Situ East. Over the next 21 years, I was promoted to vice president of operations and assumed higher levels of responsibility to include heading up their engineering, estimating, equipment maintenance, and their wholly owned subsidiaries. During this time, I also became an officer of the company and became active in 2 industry trade associations, where over time I played a leadership role as both an officer and a director of those 2 associations. I then transferred into managing a division of a company called In Situ Technologies, and that division was called Mississippi Textiles Corporation, where for the first time in my life was responsible for business development. I grew that startup division into a successful and profitable division. After that, I was then offered an opportunity to leave the trenchless industry and become the president of a successful and growing jewelry company. Now, you can't get much further from the specialized underground construction than the jewelry business. However, this opportunity presented a few unique challenges, such as a significant increase in compensation, the means of living out my non-compete agreement from the trenchless industry, and proving to myself that my skills were transferable to other businesses and industries. After growing the jewelry business 20% the first year and starting a new revenue stream of wholly owned concept stores, the owner lost his license to distribute the product. I then found myself battling lawsuits and decided that my forte was more in the operations management side, and then went back into the trenchless industry where I'm at today, working for Layne Inliner as a district manager for the Northeast area of the United States.
That's quite a career. It's not many people that go from the specialized construction industry into jewelry and then back again. But so in your current role, how many people, how big of a team, and how much geography do you support?
Well, I cover from Virginia to Maine and through Pennsylvania and New York. We are currently doing about $60 million in annualized revenue in the Northeast district.
Gotcha. And the opportunity I had to work with Greg was at Mississippi Textiles, and like Greg, that was the first time I'd been in business development as well. So let's talk about that business development gig, because that's when I learned so much from you about how to approach clients and building relationships. Talk a little bit about the change in mindset that was required to go from operations into business development.
Well, I can tell you, Todd, that change scared me to death, because I had never been in business development, but I knew that I had fairly good people skills. At least I'd been told that I had. So I found myself in a unique circumstance where now I was calling on my customers were actually the competitors of the parent company. And so it was very challenging, but yet with the skills that I had honed over the years and through the relationships I developed through the trade associations, was able to get my foot in the door and then ultimately convince people to come on board and buy the MTC product.
I'll provide a little bit of background, and then I want to talk about some of the challenges in that role. So for context, Mississippi Textiles was a subsidiary of Insituform and continues to be a subsidiary of Insituform. And Insituform was a fairly litigious company, didn't have the best relationship in the industry, and you were in a position where you needed to call on customers. Your prospects were people who were competing directly against Insituform, and in some cases were currently in lawsuits with Insituform or had been in lawsuits with Insituform. And some of your prospects were former Insituform employees who had been in litigation as well. So that was you had the deck stacked against you. It's hard to imagine a worse situation to come into from a business development standpoint. So talk a little bit about what was your approach to start from zero in that business, which had nothing when you started, and what was your approach to grow that business?
Well, what you said is absolutely correct. MTC was a wholly owned subsidiary of a large publicly held construction company, namely Insituform Technologies. And over the prior 30 years, ITI tried to block competitors from entering the business through patent protection, lawsuits, and negative selling, which I strongly am against. The new division that I was tasked to head up now involves selling our raw materials to the parent company's competitors that they sued and negatively sold against. And without question, it was the hardest job of my career. The customers initially hated me because of my association with the parent company, and the employees of the parent company hated me because I was selling to their competitors. Fortunately, through my relationships with some of the competitors that I was now calling on, they were willing to at least meet with me and hear what I had to say. And through trust, honesty, offering what I believe was a superior product than what they were currently utilizing, and then also offering my 25 years of operations management and technical support, was ultimately able to persuade some of them to come on board. And then once they did, and they found that they were getting superior service and a superior product, then the big business began to grow.
Can you tell us a story of one of the more difficult prospects that you called on and ultimately turned into a customer?
Yeah, the one that immediately comes to mind is a company up in New Jersey who was a competitor of the parent company, the lining division, and they had a very strong dislike for In Situ Farm. And initially, this firm would not even take my calls. I then tried to visit, and they would not allow me into the building. I got my foot in the door through a lower level employee and ultimately convinced them to try the materials on a very small project. And my sales pitch at the time was, if I can offer a superior product with 20 years of technical support and at an equal or better price point, what business reason do you have for not using the product? And that oftentimes causes people to pause and think about that question, and rarely do they have an answer, other than the fact that they hate you or they hate the company that you're working for. But when I got my foot in the door and had that very small project, I wanted to make sure that it went as successfully as possible. So I went up to their facility prior to the company executing that project, and then spent time in the field when the crew executed the project. So I knew the job inside out and could explain what went right and what went wrong. Mm-hmm. After using the materials, the field employees actually went back to the general manager and said, "We don't want to use any other product." And then the fellow that processed the materials also essentially said the same thing to upper management. And slowly upper management allowed the purchase and the use of the materials for all of their work. After 1 year, I met with the general manager of that division, and he admitted that the product was superior than what they had been using. But he said one of the things that he said was that the responsiveness and the support that they received from a material supplier was beyond anything they had ever experienced. And I think that is what ultimately led to my success in running MTC, was not only having a good product, but the responsiveness and the support that I was able to provide people was beyond what they were seeing from other products and materials suppliers, and ultimately convinced them that it was the way to go.
So you were selling a commodity product. There were several other products on the market, and those contracts were low bid, highly competitive municipal projects typically. So it all came down to price, and you were able to differentiate yourself based on service and relationships.
Yeah. That's exactly right, Todd. It was a municipal environment, low bid, and sometimes my price wasn't always the cheapest, but they realized, many of the customers over time and from use of the product realized that what they were getting for a little bit more, maybe 1%, 2%, 3% more in price of the raw materials, was that technical support and service that ultimately convinced them to stay with the product and continue to utilize it.
Beyond selling materials like that, when it's somewhat of a commodity, some people would say that the contracting business, especially in a low bid environment, is a commodity. Do you think that the relationship and support and that type of approach can help a contractor differentiate themselves even in a low bid contracting environment?
Absolutely. There's no question it can. And it certainly did in this particular case. Now, my product, what I was selling, was only a component of what the contractor's final price was. But I can tell you, just this morning in my staff meeting, We were recently second bidder on a $4.6 million project, and we were about $75,000 higher. But the customer actually considered awarding the job. I'm not exactly sure how it's all going to turn out, simply because of the product we've delivered in the past and the customer service that we've provided them over the course of the last 2 years. They are looking to give us a preferential award on that particular project over the low bidder.
Yeah. So even if it appears to be a competitively bid, even in a municipal environment, then it's not always about low price. It's you need to take the long view and provide a good quality installation and good experience. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And what we're seeing now in this industry is, and in fact, I'm meeting with a customer on Thursday of this week. Clients are now trying to find a way around the low bid procurement methodology. And one of the things that they're looking at doing is a design build procurement, essentially asking for a request for quotation, where price, in this particular case, price is going to be 40 points towards the award. But qualifications will be a component, as well as the end results. In this case, removing the amount of infiltration and inflow coming into the system will be a basis for award and ultimately for payment. There'll be a bonus incentive if you can remove more than 20 or 25% of the I&I coming into the system. Then there will be a bonus based on the percentage that you literally remove. So we're seeing municipalities recognizing that when you simply have a low bid criteria, then sometimes they're forced to take products or services or even deal with contractors that they know is not ultimately in their best interest. So we're finding more and more in the municipal environment that they're looking for another procurement methodology. Another case in point was I received 13 awards over the last 3 years where the product was awarded based on a proposal basis where price was 60%, but technical qualifications were 40%. And in that case, based on our technical proposals, we were actually getting preferential award on many of those projects over the low price bidder on the job.
Let me ask you this. What are some things you've done and some advice you would give to folks, say they have a contract currently? What's some advice you would give them on how to get the contract renewed or tip the scales in their favor for the next contract that comes out?
Well, I think trust is probably the most important thing. Developing trust with a customer based on your honesty and ethics. I think another important component of building that relationship and seeing ultimate renewals is timely responsiveness. You have to address the customer's needs. I think delivering quality and a professional work product is extremely important. I think facing issues head on and not procrastinating. When you have a problem, admit that you have a problem and let the customer have confidence that you're going to address that problem and you're going to address it correctly. And then I think the very last thing that I would say is help customers solve their problems, even if your product is not the solution. And I can tell you a number of times I've had people contact me thinking that they wanted to utilize my product, and I would tell them, there's a better product or there's a cheaper product out there that can solve your problem and would actually, in some cases, refer them to competitive products. But that has always left a lasting impression on people that, this guy, he's a straight shooter. He He wants to help me solve my problem and not just sell me what he's peddling. So I think those are the important aspects of building that relationship and working to get a renewal of a contract.
Yeah. So it sounds, what I'm hearing you say is take the long view, play the long game, and not just be focused on short-term results and hitting your numbers for the quarter or that particular contract.
Absolutely, and I've said that many times over my career, Todd, that I'm in this for the long term, and I'm not just after a short-term sale or short-term satisfaction. I want to build relationships. I want to keep customers. I want to renew contracts. And I want to help people solve their problems. And I think that's what differentiates some folks from others and why people remember individuals and want to work with those individuals over time.
Absolutely. Let me shift gears a little bit. You've been through several organizations, different divisions, moved up through organizations. What are some tips that you've developed for dealing with bad managers? And I know you've had some, because let's just say I know you've had some. We'll leave it at that.
Well, I think I've had some bad managers, and the way I've dealt with it is you got to just have to continue to do the best job you can do. Try to anticipate their requests and have answers when they ask the questions, and not say, I'll get back to you. And recognize that you're doing the best you absolutely can to deliver a quality work product. And I've been able to survive those bad managers. I had some that were actually younger than me that I initially thought would never go away, and they didn't last very long. So I think that was the success, is just to focus on what your tasks are and recognize that over time people are going to figure the individual out as being a bad manager, and you're going to prevail.
Does it help you to focus on your customers, or focus on senior management, or focus on your coworkers? Is there somebody that you try to keep your focus on to help you when you're dealing with a bad manager?
I think you got to focus on your customers, and you got to focus on the goals and objectives of your business plan. Mm-hmm. And if you're focused on your customers, they're going to help you meet your goals and objectives in your business plan. And if you meet your goals and objectives of your business plan, I think you're ultimately going to shine above that bad manager above you.
Yeah.
People are going to recognize it.
Yeah, sometimes a manager actually gets in the way of meeting the business objectives, but ultimately you still have to deliver. You have to take care of your customers and deliver on the business objectives, right?
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, it's unfortunate when that's the case, but in corporate America, that seems to be the case a lot. Let me ask you this. How do you know when it's time to jump ship, find another job, and what's your advice for keeping your options open? Well,
I can tell you that in reflecting back on my career, in some cases I stayed in jobs too long because I wanted to prove myself and wanted to protect people that were working for me. I think in general, you should always have an exit strategy. It doesn't have to be an immediate offer, but I think in order to determine what you're truly worth, you need to always have an eye looking on the peripheral for your next opportunity. And I think that also gives you some satisfaction that if you do have a bad manager and you see that individual building a case against you, you have an escape plan, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So that's my recommendation to people. My father, back in the 60s and early 70s, his advice was get with a large company and stay there till retirement. And I think in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, that was sound advice. But I think in this day and age, the way people accelerate through an organization is taking their skills and parlaying them into that next job. And I don't mean changing jobs on a yearly basis. I think you have to work through an organization until you reach your highest potential and then start looking to advance to your next career move. But I think you should always be looking at options, always be looking on the peripheral for that next opportunity.
Gotcha. You mentioned that in some cases you've stayed too long because you wanted to take care of the people on your team or the people that reported to you. I've been in that situation, and there's no good answer, but what's your thought process in balancing the need to take care of people on the team and balancing the need to take care of yourself and your family? How do you analyze that situation to come to the decision that it's time to go?
Well, it's funny that you asked that, because what I have found is people have followed me in my careers. I have an individual that has now worked for me. This is the third company we've worked together at. Since I came back into the trenchless industry, I can't tell you how many phone calls I've received about prior employees finding out where I'm at today and saying, I want to come back to work for you. And so, my mistake before was leaving people behind. And now I realize I could have found another opportunity for all of us to go to. And so it's actually worked out well. I joke with folks around here that I feel like John Belushi putting the band back together sometimes, because I'm kind of rebuilding my operations management team. But it's actually a good feeling to know that people had a good experience working with you. They trust you, they believe in you, and they want to follow you.
And I think that's rare, frankly. My experience has been that it's rare to find a leader who their people trust and their people want to follow. And I believe that when people find that, they'll go, because it's so rare out there. In general, what's your opinion of the quality of leadership or the quantity of good leaders in the construction industry? Do you feel like it's on par with other industries, behind? What are your thoughts on the quality of leadership in construction?
Well, that's a tough one for me to answer, because I've seen both good leaders and bad leaders in both construction and other industries. And, the construction industry tends to be more privately held companies, more so until you get into the much larger organizations. But what I'm finding in general in the larger organizations is they, particularly publicly held companies, they tend to find good managers who have been successful in other industries or other careers, but they don't have construction experience or knowledge. And I think in the construction industry, some skills are transferable, but the fact that you were an investment banker does not necessarily, and in my own personal case I've seen, did not make a good president and CEO of a construction company, because they didn't have a feel for what the people were doing day in and day out. They were simply trying to manage a balance sheet and stockholders, and that's an important aspect of managing a publicly held company. But I think you need to rally the troops and get people all working in the same direction. And I see privately held construction companies, the owners there tend to be able to do that because they typically came from the trenches. They understand what their people do day in and day out. They have a feel for that, and they can make the right decisions based on their prior experience. Whereas when you see some of the presidents and CEOs today trying to run construction companies, they really don't understand the business, and therefore don't oftentimes find the right decision.
Yeah, there's that informed experience or informed intuition that you can't develop any other way other than being in the business and going through situations over a number of years.
Correct.
You mentioned that a lot of construction companies are privately owned, a lot of small businesses, and you've crossed paths with a lot of small business owners. What are one or two common mistakes that you're seeing small construction business owners making?
I would say one, not looking for that next opportunity, meaning they're afraid to leverage their business and take it to the next level. They reach a plateau that they don't want to grow the company any further, and so they pass on some fabulous opportunities out there. Now, I would say that's probably the biggest mistake, is people just being too timid to take that next step. And some of it's because they realize they're risking their business to a degree, but if you want to grow, you have to take some risk.
And do you think that small business owners need to be looking at opportunities to either sell the business, take on investors? Do you see that as a common issue? Maybe they have blinders on to those kind of opportunities as well?
Well, partially, but I think, what I just did with a privately held construction company was I teamed on projects where they were too small to take on the project themselves, but by forming a teaming agreement with me, I kind of carried them along with me on some of these $40 and $50 million projects that, they were doing $25 to $30 million a year in annual revenues. And so it was a little bit out of their league. But over the course of the last 3 years, I've helped them grow their organization to where we're both successful now on those particular projects.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting approach to growth that a lot of people probably don't even consider. Last few questions for you. What are some things that you do every day or week to manage your team? What are some habits or routines or tools that you use to, I should say, lead your team?
Well, the first one I'll say is communicate. And that's both up the organization and down the organization. One of the things that I do with my project managers and project superintendents and my branch managers is I have a weekly staff meeting. And it can be anywhere from 30 minutes to 60 minutes. But I talk about what is going on within the corporation, above my level and at my level, and then have each individual give a quick synopsis of what they're doing on each of their jobs. And it's amazing how often we can solve problems for each other by they talk about an issue that they're having, and the next project manager will say, gosh, I experienced the same problem on my particular job, and here's how we resolved it. Or collectively we'll brainstorm a solution. So I think communication is paramount to leading a good organization. The other thing is making yourself available to your employees. That may be doing a site visit, maybe walking around the office, talking with people individually, congratulating them on a successful job, maybe pointing out where they could have did a little bit better, but constantly giving people feedback. I had a branch manager when I first started with this particular company who would come to work and just close his office door and no one saw him all day. And he didn't last very long under me. I think it was 2.5 months, because I tried to give him some guidance and he wasn't taking it. But when he left the organization and we brought in a new branch manager, everyone then started commenting how this individual just, there was no access to him. There was no communication. So I think communication is probably one of the most important aspects. Maintaining an open door policy and allowing employees to have access to you, and then listening to your employees. I can't tell you how many times people in the field have had the solution to a problem, and you just have to make yourself available to people and ask people for their opinions. Hey, we got this issue. What would you do? And they enjoy participating, and they're really excited when they see you're taking their opinion to heart and following their advice.
You know, a lot of business owners and maybe old school construction folks are kind of cringing right now, saying, communication, asking people what they think, they just need to work that shovel or pull the levers on that machine and just do what the hell they're told. What would you say to the people from that school of thought?
Well, I can tell you, this is a lesson I learned very early in life. It was in the 1976 period of time. I worked in a union chemical plant, and 9 times out of the 10, the union workers, they were just told what to do, and they had no input. And I had a particular project where I developed a team of union employees to work with me on that project, and they had input on the design and startup of that job. And it turned out to be one of the most successful projects on that plant facility. And even though we had some hiccups in the design build stage of the project and the startup, those fellows went to bat, and they were going to solve the problems to make it a success because they were brought in the early stages of the project. And it's something that taught me a valuable lesson in life. And I did that numerous times at that facility, and routinely had very successful projects as a result of that strategy. These are the people that are in there working day in and day out, managing the process or working with the technologies. And they oftentimes have insights that even though we're engineers or project managers, we think we know it all. They oftentimes have insights that can make it a much more valuable and successful solution in an ultimate project.
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now called Drive by an author named Daniel Pink, and he talks about motivation, internal motivation versus external motivation, and that when you ask questions and engage somebody and get their buy-in on a solution, then they're going to be much more likely to solve the problem and make it successful. Whereas if you just prescribe a solution to someone and try to shove it down their throat, they're not going to be bought in, and in some cases, they're going to be opposed to it to prove you wrong.
That's exactly right, Todd. I couldn't agree more.
That's a huge lesson, and I've seen it work. I mean, when I was early in my career, I learned I could get a lot more cooperation by asking questions of some of the old pipe fitters and plumbers and electricians than by coming out there as a 23-year-old engineer telling them what to do. That just didn't fly. Couple more questions for you. If you could go back in time 20 years and talk to young Greg and give him some advice, what are 1 or 2 things you would tell young Greg?
Well, I think the first thing is manage stress. When I reflect back on my career, I was a bit of a workaholic, and I worked under high levels of stress, and the stress was self-imposed. It wasn't my boss demanding better results. It wasn't my boss demanding that I work more hours. In fact, in one particular case, I had the president and CEO of a company direct me to work less hours because I was working way too many hours over others. But so I think stress was a driver for me, but also in hindsight, it had a detrimental effect on my health. So I think managing stress is one of the things that if I could do it all over again, I would do a better job at. The other thing is keeping things in perspective. Sometimes we have problems and we think, oh, if this doesn't go right, it's going to be the end of my career. And I look back on those times and I realize that, I kind of lost sight of the big picture, and I was so focused on the detail that it cost me time and energy. And so I think in general, we tend to lose sight of things, and you have to keep things in perspective. And then the last thing, once again, that I did not do in my career is maintain a life outside of work. I tended to be a workaholic, and I sacrificed my family and my health during my career because I was much too busy to go for that medical test, or I was too busy to go to my daughter's ballet recital. And in hindsight, that was a mistake. I think you have to find a good balance of personal life and work. And I'm not saying that you work 6 hours a day, because that's unacceptable to me. But I think you do have to find time to say enough's enough and put it down and go home and leave it behind you and have quality time at home with both your spouse and your family.
Absolutely. That's great advice. What are some mistakes that you see young leaders or young folks in the construction industry making, and what's some advice you would give to them?
Well, one, I think, is work ethic. What I'm seeing in today's workers and leaders is oftentimes they lack work ethic. They're there simply for a paycheck. And I think that's something that helped me get to where I'm at today. And I've had much higher levels of responsibility than I have today, and I purposely decided to come in at a lower level of responsibility because of just what I said. I wanted to keep things in perspective and manage stress and maintain a life outside of work. I found that those things were important to me as I changed jobs. And so I didn't want to be the president of a company again. I had been there and I had done that. I knew I didn't want to be the vice president of a company, even though I had the skills to do it. So I took a little bit of a lower level job in order to enjoy the things that I found outside of work. So that's one thing. Another one is not communicating and not making themselves available to their staff and their employees. Essentially what I said earlier, hiding behind a closed door. I think you have to get out there, talk with people. You have to show an interest in what your subordinates are doing on a day-to-day basis. And the last one is not communicating effectively. You need to continue to convey the direction of the company, the financial results, feedback on an individual's performance. And I see people being timid today about those kind of touchy-feely things, so to speak. Going out and talking to an employee about their family, about their children, what's going on in their personal life, and just taking a few minutes to lead into the issues that you clearly want to discuss with that individual. I find that goes a long, long way, and I find some of my younger people, they're focused on the job, but they're not focused on the human aspects of the job.
That's so true. I know that's a realization I came to a few years into my career. It took me a while to figure that out, that we're not just here for results, that the relationships are extremely important as well.
Absolutely.
Well, very good. Well, Greg, I really appreciate it. This has been fantastic, and thank you so much for taking some time to be on the call today.
Well, thank you very much, Todd, for the opportunity, and I hope some of the things I shared today can be helpful to some of the folks that listen to the call.
I guarantee it. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Todd. Thank you.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the Construction Leading Edge podcast. Head on over to constructionleadingedge.com to find more resources just like this, more interviews with entrepreneurs, more leadership tips and tricks to develop your skills in the area of leadership. Follow me on Twitter at ConLeadEdge. And if you want to join a community of like-minded leaders and you want to better yourself and get insider access to information like this, go to constructionleadingedge.com/nation and click on the green box to join the Construction Leading Edge Nation. Actually, it may be a yellow box. Whatever color box it is on that page, join the Construction Leading Edge Nation. We're building a community here of like-minded leaders in the construction industry so we can all get better together. Until next time, my name is Todd Dawalt. Thanks, guys.